Good afternoon, dear friends. Today, we have a topic that has long been requested for discussion in our philosophical club. Today, we will talk a little about genetics. Genetics is a relatively young science, but it is already clear that it is capable of significantly adjusting our understanding of the past, unveiling the veil of secrets over our history, and influencing the future of humanity as a whole and each individual. We will discuss what is interesting in genetics right now, what questions arise that need to be discussed. Today, I will have a conversation with my guest, mathematician and associate professor of the Department of Differential Geometry and Applications at the Mechanics and Mathematics Faculty of Lomonosov Moscow State University, Gleb Vladimirovich Nozovsky. Hello, Gleb Vladimirovich.
Hello, it's very nice to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Gleb Vladimirovich, we have known each other for over 20 years, and I have always been amazed by your broad scientific erudition. But recently, it turned out that genetics is also within your sphere of interest. How do mathematics and genetics intersect? In what areas? And is genetics an object of study for mathematicians? Can mathematics help geneticists in processing the data they obtain?
Mathematics is directly applied to genetics. What is genetics? Genetics is how our bodies are built. Not only ours, but also that of any living being. It is built according to a certain program. In the past, when people imagined how humans and the world were created, they did not yet understand what programming, algorithms, Turing machine, and so on were. All of this only emerged in the 20th century. They imagined, let me read directly what the Bible says. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. I will skip some verses. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And God said, let the water be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear. Then God said, let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees that bear fruit. And it was so. In other words, this is the notion that a certain intelligent creator created life on earth. However, it should not be assumed that these representations, as they are presented in the Bible, were scientific notions of that time. It should be understood that the Bible is not a book for scientists. It is a book for everyone. And people at that time were mostly illiterate. Even today, what scientists know is not presented to society in exactly the same form. It is always somehow simplified, often distorted, and so on.
In the interest of popularization.
Today, many people think that science is the same as what they read in popular science books. That is far from the truth. It was the same in the past. Let's open Diodorus. Diodorus is a person who, according to traditional history,
Diodorus of Sicily.
Yes, Diodorus of Sicily. He supposedly lived even before Christ. In the new chronology, it is not the case, but now it doesn't matter. What matters is that it is an ancient text that dates back to the same era or approximately the same era as the Bible. Unlike the Bible, which is an exposition for the common people, Diodorus writes for learned individuals. Here is what he writes. Now, as regards the first origin of mankind, two opinions have arisen. I will also skip some parts. One group, which takes the position that the universe did not come into into being and will not decay, has declared that the race of men also has existed from eternity, there having never been a time when men were first begotten. The other group, however, which hold that the universe came into being and will decay, has declared that, like it, men had their first origin at a definite time. By the way, this is
the current situation.
Yes, this thought is the same as today. In the 19th and 20th centuries, people also thought that time was infinite. Today, there is a theory that it is finite, that there was a Big Bang, and that everything happened at some point.
These two viewpoints have survived.
Yes, they have survived since the time of Diodorus, perhaps with slightly different wording, but the same thoughts. Let's continue with what Diodorus writes. In the beginning, both heaven and earth were indistinguishable in appearance, since their elements were intermingled. Then, when their bodies separated from one another, the universe took on in all its parts the ordered form in which it is now seen. The air set up a continual motion, and the fiery element in it gathered into the highest regions, while all that was mud-like and thick and contained an admixture of moisture, sank, because of its weight, into one place. And as this continually turned about upon itself and became compressed, out of the wet it formed the sea, and out of what was firmer, the land, which was like potter's clay and entirely soft. But as the sun's fire shone upon the land, it first of all became firm, and then, since its surface was in a ferment because of the warmth, portions of the wet swelled up in masses in many places, and in these pustules covered with delicate membranes made their appearance. That is, life. Pustule is life, the initial bacteria. That is exactly how they understood that life began with putrefaction. Well, further, it's essentially the same, since moisture gave rise to life through heat by the mentioned method, and so on, and eventually led to the emergence of human beings. This is what Diodorus wrote supposedly 2,000 years ago. Let me read a modern article from the journal Chemistry and Life from 2013. If you remember what Diodorus wrote, you will be interested to compare. So, at the beginning of the Archean period, the Earth was covered with a dense carbon dioxide atmosphere. Geothermal sources brought up zinc and manganese sulfides from the depths of the Earth's crust, on the surface of which photochemical reactions of CO2 reduction, organic synthesis, and polymerization of various monomers took place. From this system, long RNA-like molecules emerged under the influence of ultraviolet radiation, forming double-stranded regions through Watson-Crick complementary base pairing. They catalyzed certain chemical reactions, including those leading to the synthesis of nucleotides and the polymerization of their own copies. This is what the RNA world looked like on the eve of the emergence of proteins.
The same as Diodorus, but Diodorus expressed it in a more understandable way.
Just some new terms have emerged, but the overall picture is exactly the same. Here, it mentions the influence of ultraviolet radiation, and there, the heat of the sun. It's the same thing. As Diodorus writes, fermentation occurred.
Even the first DNA was obtained from putrefaction.
From Diodorus to 2013, actually, something has changed. Various new concepts have emerged, but the overall picture in scientists' understanding of how life originated has remained the same. And if we look at it further, it eventually raises the question of whether life could have originated by chance. Could all of this have happened by chance? Look at what Chemistry and Life writes. It's actually a common understanding. The protein synthesis system in modern cells is quite complex. Its main component is the ribosome, a nanomachine that links amino acids, consisting of 3 RNA molecules with a total length of up to 5,000 nucleotides and approximately 70 proteins. So, this is a kind of program, the most ancient, the first, the simplest, with a length of about 5,000 nucleotides. It should be understood that nucleotides are not elementary units. They are tens of thousands of elementary units, no matter what they are called. That's not important. We are reasoning from a mathematical point of view here. We won't delve into how it's all structured.
We look at the cybernetic part.
Mathematically, all of these are letters. Letters form words, and these words encode something. How many of these letters are there exactly? 4 or 10 or 30? For our estimates, it's not important right now. It doesn't matter because 4 squared is greater than 10, and 10 squared is greater than 30. Therefore, it doesn't matter how many letters there are exactly. This will not more than double the number of zeros that we're about to calculate. And we will speak in general terms, so being off by a factor of 2 doesn't bother us at all. It was that original nanomachine, the ribosome, that had to come into existence by chance in order for life to start moving forward rapidly. Because a living organism no longer moves forward randomly, it adapts. It's a self-learning program. But initially, it had to arise randomly, and then it would continue self-learning non-randomly. The very initial nanomachine that had to arise by chance had about tens of thousands of letters. Let's remember this number. Naturally, people have immediate questions. Simpler variations of this system capable of protein synthesis are unknown.
A program of 3 letters, 2 words, something like that.
And today, when people already know how to program, they understand perfectly well that it's not possible to create a more or less complex self-learning program with 3, 5, or 10 letters. In any case, it will have thousands of letters, even the simplest ones. And people understand this, which is why they write the following: simpler variations of this system are unknown. Therefore, supporters of intelligent design consider protein synthesis as an example of a system that is adaptive only in its complete form. In other words, already sufficiently developed, its step-by-step development is considered impossible. Obviously, the author of the article in Chemistry and Life understands that they need to counter these people who support intelligent design because this is a bad theory. And he says, however, scientists have found evidence of the gradual origin of the components of this complex system. Here, there is an immediate misrepresentation. What does the gradual origin mean? Gradual origin doesn't say anything. Random emergence can also occur gradually. First, one chain, then it randomly increases. The question is not whether it happens gradually or not. The question lies in probabilistic assessments. Today, understanding what a program is, understanding what an algorithm is, understanding that our bodies, like the bodies of any living beings, are created through some algorithm, through a program, we can assess the complexity of this program. The DNA genome has been decoded. We know that in its most original form, it consists of tens of thousands. Today, there is the so-called C-value paradox, which states that the genes of all living beings, starting from some worms and mollusks and ending with humans, are approximately the same length. This means that the amount of information encoding a human is on the order of millions, tens of millions, let's say a billion. And some worm, and even a tree or a plant, can also have billions, millions, or the simplest tens of thousands of information content. It turns out that this program, which has many gaps, but still, this program is both for humans and worms.
It's complex.
It is approximately the same. We are speaking in terms of orders of magnitude. A difference of 10 to 20 times doesn't concern us. In terms of orders of magnitude, it is approximately the same. The question arises, could it have arisen by chance? And to answer this question, we first need to understand what is by chance and what is not. It used to be something obvious to people, because by chance means it's random, and not by chance means that a gray-bearded old man came, spat, rubbed a piece of clay in his hands, blew into it, and created something, not by chance. As we can see, for example, from Diodorus, the ancients didn't have such an understanding. It was a simplified picture for simple people, and none of those ancient scientists who pondered the origin of life imagined it that way. Let's calculate. If in the 19th century, during Darwin's theory, there was no probability theory, no algorithm theories, no programming, then how did people reason? Humans are complex beings, life is complex, and there was plenty of time, billions of years.
A monkey will type the novel, War and Peace.
Yes, a monkey will type, War and Peace. This is a well-known phrase, and now we will analyze it. What portion of War and Peace can a monkey type in billions of years? People thought that it was a complex system, but one that could have arisen by chance over a long period. And this is absolutely correct. Probability theory states that given a sufficient amount of time, any finite sequence can arise purely by chance. Therefore, if you sit a monkey down or simply expand any irrational number, for example of pi, which as we know also yields a random sequence, then eventually in this expansion any finite sequence will emerge. War and Peace, with some typos, War and Peace, printed in reverse order, the human genome, the distorted human genome, the human genome in reverse order, the genome of any monkey, any finite sequence will emerge simply by randomly pressing a button. Hence, this statement is theoretically correct. But today we can ask ourselves, does this align with the understanding of modern science? Because we now know the numbers. Unlike a person in the 19th century who didn't know what a genome was. They didn't know the complexity of this organism. They didn't know how many years have passed since the Big Bang. They knew nothing.
How long it has been rotting.
That's why one could reason like that. But today we know. Let's take a look. The monkey types War and Peace. And in reality, it doesn't matter how often it presses the buttons. Let's say it presses the buttons once every nanosecond or once a year. The difference between pressing at a rate of once per nanosecond and once per year is just a matter of adding several zeros. And how many letters are used in War and Peace? 4, 30. Let's assume 10 because it's easier to calculate. There is no difference either.
At such magnitudes, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter at these orders of magnitude we're discussing. To randomly generate an object with a probability of 1 in n, approximately n, random trials are needed. Around n. If it's 1 in a million, it means you have to press about 1 million times. If we have 10 letters, the complexity of the text is 10 raised to the power of its length. And the complexity of one letter is 1/10. If we take one letter out of a set of 10, the probability is 1/10. A combination of 2 letters has a probability of 100th. 3 letters, 1,000th. For n letters, it's 1 divided by 10 to the power of n. Therefore, to randomly generate a text of length n letters, the number of trials needed is approximately 10 to the power of n. Let's take a look. War and Peace has tens or hundreds of thousands of letters. In the genome, there are tens of thousands. Essentially, it's roughly the same, whether it's War and Peace or the genome. They both have tens or hundreds of thousands of letters. The number of trials that randomly need to occur for such a sequence to emerge is 10 to the power of tens of thousands. And let's see how much time we have for this. Let's gather all the monkeys. Let's take not just the age of the Earth, but the time since the Big Bang. How much?
15 billion years.
Come on, let's take not 15 but 100 billion years. Let's make this little monkey type at an enormous speed. The biological process also has its own pace. We need to understand that it can't happen faster than fractions of a second. How many zeros will we accumulate? From a second to a year, that's 8 to 9 zeros. From a year to a billion years, another 9. To 100 billion, let's add 2 more. Let's say nanoseconds, it makes 30 zeros. Alright, 30 zeros. Now, let's assume we have a vast number of these monkeys. As many as there are molecules. Another 20 zeros. It makes 50. That's on Earth. Let's say not on Earth, but in the solar system. Let's add another 20 zeros. We have 70 now. We can't have more than 100 zeros in any way. Going beyond 100 zeros is impossible.
What's the conclusion?
We need tens of thousands. And we have 100 zeros, which we'll never reach. I used rough estimates. All the monkeys, all the molecules. Every nanosecond they are typing in each and every corner of the universe. They will randomly be able to type just one line of War and Peace during the lifetime of the universe. That's the relationship with the complexity of the text. It might seem like not very difficult, and we might think, what's the big deal? Just one line from War and Peace, and the entire universe's existence, from the Big Bang, and all the monkeys involved.
Even with the lifetimes of the entire universe, there won't be enough time to randomly write a line from War and Peace for all the monkeys that have ever lived on Earth.
That's right, not just for all the monkeys. Not enough for all the molecules either. So one thing is a theoretical statement that everything arises by chance. Absolutely correct statement. But another thing is
to calculate.
Yes, to calculate. And when people say that today's scientific approach is based on the idea that everything arose by chance, that's not true. The scientific approach does not consist of that because it contradicts the data of modern science. It could have been like that if we had infinite time. In infinite time, it could happen. I'll tell you that in infinite time, not only humans could arise by chance. In infinite time, with a probability of 1, a creature would emerge that would later create another creature. And that's why, in infinite time, with a probability of 1, we didn't arise by chance, but were created by someone who was created sometime by someone, who was created by someone, who arose by chance.
So any hypothesis is confirmed.
Yes, in theoretical infinity, everything could arise, but with a probability of 0, we didn't arise in the first stage of this process. That's why we were created by someone, even in this case.
Do new discoveries in genetics play into the hands of creationists or evolutionists?
You can't put it that way. It's an unscientific approach. Look, I still want to say something philosophical. I'm not a philosopher, but I want to say something philosophical. Maybe philosophers will criticize me. It is inherent in humans to have the desire to worship something. Ancient humans worshipped God, and if a person doesn't understand very well what they are worshiping, it only contributes to it. The less they understand what they are worshiping, the more fervently they are willing to worship it. Conversely, they don't worship something familiar but rather something incomprehensible. There are natural inclinations and unnatural inclinations. The natural inclination is to worship God. It's a natural inclination. It comes from the depths of the ages. It is widespread among all people and comes from the depths of the human soul. But in modern civilization, unnatural inclinations occur. People can change the object of worship. There are people who worship science. The less they understand about science, the more fervently they are willing to worship it and talk about scientific achievements, about how science, if it hasn't proven their correctness, will definitely prove it in the future. They truly believe in it. The very formulation of the question, into which hands do they play, is incorrect. It is unscientific.
All right, I'll rephrase the question. What conclusion can be drawn from the infinitesimally small probability of life arising randomly, as we discussed earlier?
Let me explain. It depends on the perspective. From a scientific standpoint, the conclusion is that life was intelligently designed. Let's go back to what we agreed upon. What distinguishes intelligent creation from unintelligent? Leo Tolstoy sat down and wrote War and Peace. Is that an intelligent creation?
Yes, it is intelligent.
But in the decimal expansion of pi, which is completely unintelligent, War and Peace would also exist. It would also be created by a simple decimal expansion of pi or by the monkey's keystrokes. Even though it would take a time significantly longer than the lifespan of the universe, theoretically, it's possible. Any creation or its description is a finite text. Any finite text can arise by chance. Therefore, any intelligent creation arises by chance. And what's the difference? The difference lies only in time. The difference between intelligent and unintelligent lies in time. Leo Tolstoy sat down and wrote War and Peace in 2 years. But for an unintelligent monkey to write War and Peace, it would take
trillions of years.
Not trillions. 10 to the power of several thousand years. It's not trillions. Trillions is nothing.
I blurted it out, hoping to say many years.
You see, the difference between intelligence and unintelligence. Modern science has reached a level where we now understand many things that people didn't understand before. All of this was understood by mathematicians only in the 20th century. And maybe it simply hasn't reached everyone yet. Many people still hold on to old notions. And genetics doesn't play into anyone's hands. It simply provides us with new observational data. How does theory evolve? There's a theory, and there are observations. We know that when a theory starts contradicting observations, the theory needs to be changed. But changing a theory is always painful, and that's a good thing. People don't want to change their theories. That's why those observations need to accumulate and reach a critical mass for people to finally change the theory. Today, genetics provides us with observational data that will change our understanding. But it hasn't happened yet. Geneticists themselves haven't fully figured it out. It's still new, and it all needs to be double-checked many times over.
By the way, what interesting and new things, perhaps paradoxical, are there?
Paradoxical? I've already told you that organisms have genomes of the same level of complexity. How can that be purely from an intelligent perspective? Let's imagine that life arose randomly. Let's forget all the calculations we've been doing and imagine that life on Earth arose randomly. In decay, in bubbling, as Diodorus wrote, or these smart words written in Chemistry and Life, they essentially mean the same thing. They are indeed correct. And, as Darwin said, through mutation and natural selection. After all, we haven't invalidated Darwin yet. He is considered correct. One mutated well, while another mutated poorly. The one who mutated well survived, while the one who mutated poorly perished. And through this natural selection, species emerged, and humans emerged. But that's a path of complexity, isn't it? Initially simple, then accumulating mutations. It accumulated mutations, it became more complex. Humans began to speak. Why did they start speaking? If we believe Darwin, then random mutations occurred, and the gift of speech emerged, and he saw that it was good, as it is written there.
And they survived.
And God saw that it was good. And here, humans saw that it was good and survived. Afterward, it all became firmly established. That's what Darwin says. Not long ago, I read an article about research on the region of the human genome responsible for human speech. They found this genomic region by studying a family with a genetic disorder. It turns out there is a genetic disorder that prevents a person from speaking. So, everything is fine with their tongue, throat, and comprehension.
But they cannot speak.
They cannot speak, and it is hereditary. So, they are similar to an animal that cannot speak. They found such a family, studied their genome, and discovered that specific region of the genome, which, according to the researchers, is defective.
It disabled speech.
No, it didn't disable. It turned out to be defective in this person and this family. The most interesting part is that later, when they started studying the genomes of other living beings, I don't remember exactly, I saw some kind of list. Horses, mice, rats. I'm not sure about insects, but they definitely studied many mammals. According to Darwin, animals that are speechless haven't reached our level and couldn't develop the gift of speech within themselves. But we did. It turned out that in these mice, rats, and horses that couldn't develop the gift of speech within themselves, that region exists too, but it's blocked. Through these genetic mechanisms, a blockade is established that prevents the genome from being activated. And we also have blocked regions. It's unknown what they would do if they weren't blocked, but they are blocked. Referring again to this article, the blockage is very strong. In other words, it cannot be overcome by random mutations and cannot accidentally be bypassed.
So, at least, large animals were created with the gift of speech, but it's disconnected.
Not disconnected, it's not turned on. From a programmer's perspective, we know that programs can have commented out sections. There's a program that runs, and there's a symbol in the program that represents comments. Every programmer understands that if we don't want that piece of code to execute, we put that symbol at the beginning of each line, and that's it. The section stops working. It's commented out. From a mathematical perspective, that's exactly how the gene is structured. So, this region exists not only in us but in all others, but in them, it's commented out, while in us, it's uncommented.
So, Darwin's theory doesn't explain this?
No, it doesn't.
And if crick technologies develop where we can modify a virus, using a scalpel, virus-like pieces can be cut out and replaced with others. Does that mean we could see talking horses, talking dogs?
Yes, humanity is already moving towards creating certain beings. In other words, humanity itself can become a creator for someone else. We are already heading in that direction.
And they will wonder how it happened that they can sit and reason. Gleb Vladimirovich, thank you so much. Personally, I found it very interesting. I'm sure our viewers were also intrigued. As always happens in our philosophical club, the more questions are asked, the more new ones arise. I hope we'll meet again. Thank you for visiting us. Thanks to all the viewers who were with us. See you soon. Gleb Vladimirovich, thank you for being